Well, welcome to Wyoming Armory, right here in the heart and soul of American vintage firearms, Cody, Wyoming. Now this is part 2 of a detailed multi-part series we're doing on the full restoration of a deluxe medium frame Colt Lightning rifle. Now in the first episode we showed you the rifle and the condition it was in, and we did all the disassembly work. Today we're going to go through the preparation phase for the next step, which is polishing. But we've still got several steps we need to go through before we start that polishing process. So stick around, we'll show you what it takes to get prepared for the polishing process, particularly with a firearm that's been through previous color case hardening. So stick around, this ought to be interesting and informative. Okay, so for those of you who saw the first episode, you may recall that we've got this deluxe Lightning medium frame here that's had the finish removed from it, and I don't think intentionally. It appears that there was some kind of a chemical that took the finish off, and it really didn't affect the wood surprisingly, but it took all the finish off of the metal parts, and we can see kind of a residue that's under the barrel here that was left over between the mag tube and the barrel, and here's the top of the mag tube as well has that stuff on it. Why they didn't clean this gun up after it got contaminated, I have no idea, but there were some helpful comments, and I think they're probably right in that this was probably some fire suppression chemicals, maybe even out of a fire extinguisher. This may have been in a fire, the fire extinguisher chemicals got on it and somebody didn't clean it up for whatever reason. If they'd cleaned it up right away, they might have saved the finish. But anyway, if it's corrosive enough that that it took the finish off of this metal, we're gonna get masked up. These bring back bad memories, right? Get some safety glasses on, and I think we can just probably take it off with a wire brush here, and then we get that done, then we'll move on to the next step. We need to get this receiver off of the barrel. Okay, now it's time to get this receiver off of the barrel, and you might notice on a Colt Lightning, when it's completely disassembled, we've got some very thin sides here that aren't supported very well, so it'd be very easy to bend these or torque them as we're trying to get this receiver off of the barrel. So we're going to put the lower tang in. That's going to give it a whole bunch more support. I would never try to take a barrel off of a Lightning without the lower tang installed. Okay. And for those of you who watch the channel regularly, you know I've got a much more robust barrel vise back at the Cinnabar, but this one will have to do. And of course, on octagon barrels, it's much easier to get a good grip than on round barrels. So this one will work fine for our octagon barrels here. Okay, we'll get our action wrench tightened up here. We've had this thing soaking in Croil for a while. Croil is just a wonderful penetrating oil. If you got something else that you like better, well, you're welcome to use it. Tighten it up pretty good here. We'll try to get the jaws just as even as possible. Okay, so now we'll just give it a good wrap, and just that easy, it's loosening up. Now this one's a bit unusual, and it's coming off pretty hard the whole way. Usually once they pop loose, they just unscrew pretty easily. So we're going to see, hopefully we don't have some kind of thread damage either on the barrel or in the receiver. Doesn't appear so. It just got a lot of grit and grime and stuff, and maybe some of that suppression chemical got in there. We can see plenty of Croil that penetrated deep into those threads. Oh, the threads look good. That's good news. Just a lot of crud in there. Now the next step before we can start polishing is to determine which of these parts was originally case color hardened. because if they're still hard, we're going to have a heck of a time trying to polish these, especially if they've got pits that we're going to have to draw file out. And we already tested this in our first episode, and we can see some color case hardening on this lower tang, but you can hear when a file just skates across and doesn't cut. Same thing on the upper tank. So we know this was all color case hardened originally. It's still very hard, so we're going to have to get that out to the oven to anneal it. We know that hammers were color case hardened. They had to be case hardened because these notches would wear out very, very quickly if they're not hardened, and we can test it there. The other thing we know are case hardened from looking at high condition examples, these ejector bars that fit in the receiver like that, and of course we're going to have to polish that outside to make it look good. These are definitely color case hardened originally. Now the trigger is a little bit of an anomaly because it has to be hard up here on this sear. That's what rides in these notches, and it'll wear out very quickly the other way if it's not hardened. But you can see that beautiful Colt fire blue or niter blue that's up above where it was exposed down here, and the finish is gone. So we know that this was a niter blued originally, so we're gonna go ahead and clean up that sear a little bit, and then we'll just harden that with a casement hardening process rather than color case harden it, and then we'll bring it back out and niter blue it. Now the question we have now is whether the butt plate was color case hardened or blued, and so we can do our file test on it, and boy, you can hear the difference. It's cutting right in. You can see it's shiny down here. So this would have been a blued piece here, and we kind of knew that because I've seen other high condition Colt Lightnings, and they all had blued butt plates, even the ones that had color case hardened receivers. So we'll set these two aside, and now the rest of these parts are going to have to go out in the oven and get annealed or have the outer surfaces softened before we can start draw filing or polishing. Now in order to anneal or normalize these parts, we bring them out here, put them in the kiln, bring it up to about 700 degrees, let them soak in that heat for a couple hours, and then just turn the kiln off and let it slowly cool off overnight. And what that does is it helps for that carbon that was infused into that outer layer of the metal when it was originally color case hardened to migrate back out, and that softens the metal. The other thing it does is it allows us to recolor case harden and get good colors. If we don't anneal, typically we just don't get good colors again when we go through the color case hardening process a second time. So let's take a look at these parts, see how they look now. Okay, now prepare yourselves. It's a little shocking the first time you see parts come out of the anneal because it really dulls their appearance. And in this case, where we've got some oxidation on there, we see that oxidation really stands out. And you think the first time you do this, oh my goodness, I've destroyed that part. But it's a necessary step in the process, and it's going to clean right up. So let's take these parts in, and we'll get them in the Bead Blast cabinet and get all that nasty looking stuff off of them, and just see how deep these pits are going to be underneath that old oxidation. Now this next step, the Bead Blast, isn't necessary in all cases. But in this case, where we've got some rust scale, particularly on this barrel, on this one flat, we need to get that off of there and see how deep the pitting might be underneath. If it's deep enough, then we may have to fill it, but we won't know. If we start draw filing this, we won't know until we get to the bottom just how deep those pits are. Now here in this shop, we do not weld on barrels. We can TIG weld up receivers and other parts, but on barrels, TIG's a low temperature option, but it's not low enough temperature in my opinion for a barrel. So we send barrels out that have to be filled to a laser welder that works for us. And then on the receiver here, of course, we already showed you there's some active rust scale there that we need to get to the bottom of. And you know, if we get through that and find that there's something really deep, we can weld that in-house. And of course, we already know we've got an extra hole in this tang we showed you in the last episode that we're going to have to weld up here. So we'll get these in there. If you've got a gun that doesn't have much pitting or deeper dings or anything, you can skip this bead blasting step altogether. We'll set these in here, and you notice we've got the bore plugged, and we've taped real heavy around the barrel threads, and we've plugged the inside threads on the receiver just so we're not blasting at those threads. We protect those threads with everything we've got. Okay, let's get these cleaned up. Okay, let's see what we got to deal with now. Okay, now that we're done with the bead blast, we've got a lot better idea what we're up against. Now, the one thing we didn't bead blast was these ejector bars because they're just so small. I was afraid that the bead blast, them big bulky gloves, I'd blast them right out of my hands and would spend the rest of the day digging around trying to find them in the blasting cabinet. But next up, we've got this hammer, and this hammer's in really nice condition. We've got a little bit of pitting along the edges. It's kind of a challenge with these hammers because there's just so many little different angles and nooks and crannies on them. But the real good news on this one is that the knurling on this hammer spur is in fantastic, like new condition. And when those are worn, you know, there's just really no bringing them back. So that's a big plus there. Now the butt plate, it's more good news. We've got a little pitting mostly up on top here, but it'll be easy enough to take out. There isn't a bunch of dings in it like there is on typical butt plates, so this one's in really nice condition that way. It'll be pretty easy to clean this one up and save it. Now on the receiver, of course, we knew that there was some rust up in this area, and we can see kind of some of that showing up. The bead blast covers up quite a little bit, but it'll show up again once we start polishing. And of course, you know, we've got a rampant Colt stamped on the side of receivers on a Colt Lightning, and while it's still visible, those are stamped very, very lightly, and we're probably going to lose that in the polishing process. That's the only stamp on the receiver. There isn't one on the tang. Of course, we know we've got a hole to fill here on the tang, but we'll have to get that Colt re-stamped when we're done, most likely. Now we've got the serial number here on the lower tang, and it's very well stamped. They stamped it really deep except for the last number, and that's a product of the stamping at the factory. It's a little light on the top half of that last number, but the rest of it's really nice and certainly will be salvageable. Okay, now let's look at the mag tube and the barrel. On this mag tube, it does have some light pitting in places, but very light and widespread, and so it's going to be pretty easy to clean this one up. The nice thing about this mag tube is we showed you in the first episode, there's some beautiful original Colt blue on it, so we've got a good reference, and we've left this so that when we go to polish and start our rust bluing process, we've got a great reference to go to, and we'll polish and blue right to this and match it to the original factory color really well this way. Now on the barrel, as we mentioned, we did have one flat here that had some rust scale on it, and we can see that there's some pitting there. It's not deep, but of course we're going to have to clean that one flat up pretty well, and anytime we go a little deeper on a flat to try to clean up that pitting, we're going to make that one flat a little bit wider. So we're going to have to really pay attention when we go to polish this and to draw file those pits out, not to make this flat wider than the next flats, and so we're going to show you how we accomplish that and keep those lines straight, which is incredibly important on an octagon barrel. Now the beauty of this barrel is that there's almost no dings in the edges of these octagon flats, so that's a huge plus. Now we do see there's one right here. I think there's another one down further down towards the breech end, but we'll show you how our techniques for getting little dings like that out on the edges and still maintaining a good crisp edge and straight lines. Now the unfortunate part of this barrel is that when it was the address was stamped at the factory, they got the top line, and particularly this first part of it, pretty light. Now you can see the bottom line, which has the patent dates and patent information on it, is pretty deep and really easy to read. But the top line, and these were on separate roll dies, believe it or not. This wasn't rolled in on one die. There was a roll die for the bottom line and a roll die for the top line, and the top line's a lot lighter. So by the time we get done with this one, just cleaning that up and polishing it, and there's very little pitting around it, we're probably going to be so washed out on that top line we're going to have to restamp at least that top line. Okay, and then we get down to the caliber stamp, and it's good and deep, and we're going to be able to save that one without much trouble at all. We did manage to save some of the original polish on the barrel down here on the bottom as well. So again, like the mag tube original finish, we'll be able to polish this to the original polish lines that are still showing on the bottom of the barrel here, which is extremely valuable. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode and maybe learned a little something as well. Now, if you're interested in having us do some restoration work for you, and you don't have a kiln for annealing or a bead blast cabinet, and you want to do your own polishing, then you can send the parts that you need to have annealed or blasted, and we'd be happy to do that work for you. And keep an eye out for the upcoming episode, maybe the most important episode we'll do for those of you who are interested in firearms restoration, and that's where we go through the whole process in detail of how to properly hand polish parts for refinishing. So thanks for joining us today. Until next time, happy trails from Wyoming Armory and Cody, Wyoming.